I'll buy it anyway, but
Just to complete the collection.
I've got to.
It's
I've
lucky
got
that
to.
you collect albums instead of people.
So it's the first SOA sermon then, featuring the drummer and the guitarist, the two quietest people in the band.
Yeah, maybe that was a problem with the format, but then I don't know. We could kind of just get Andre to do it all on his own, and it would kind of line him up and set him on his way.
You could, yeah, lead singers, one man podcast.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about prog rock. I mean, I think prog, that's a bit of a weird, like, because everyone has a completely different view on what prog rock is, right? So,
Yes.
because I mean, to me, I would say, you know, Opeth is pretty definitively prog rock, but then if you tell Mark that, then he'll just kind of.
Yes, and I think I'd probably side with Mark on that one actually.
Yeah.
Much as I like Opeth and have all the Opeth albums.
But that's I mean, when you get to modern progressive rock, that's,
Yeah.
there's this, like, it was like you were saying with the subgenres. You know, you got progressive rock, you got progressive metal. You know, but how does progressive metal different from technical death metal or whatever?
Yeah.
Whatever. But,
Well, it evolved over the years, and I think it's probably evolved more actually over the last 10 years or so. I think with the rise of things like gent and stuff, where a lot of people do actually view that as prog now, which I don't, because I'm not from that area, and I don't know whether it's a generational thing.
I don't know. I did once audition for a band who were looking for a prog drummer, and they specifically they said prog, and we mean prog, not progressive rock or whatever. They said prog. So I responded to this advert this time. So yeah, you know, I'm interested in King Crimson and you know, Yes and Caravan, you know, probably Canterbury scene stuff. And I said, yeah, so we're looking for kind of hacktivist. But like, well, even if you're talking about old prog, that's pretty different as well, because then you know you've got Yes and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
King Crimson, which is, I mean, arguably cut from the same cloth as Yes. Then you get all the Canterbury scene stuff, you know, like Caravan, which is a bit proggier, kind of, you know, going down the spectrum to like, you know, 10cc or something.
Yeah.
You know, and then suddenly you get like, I keep thinking Sensational Alex Harvey band.
Alan Parsons Project.
Yeah. You know, which I think is kind of pretty different again, really. It's kind of when you get that kind of like poppy prog kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think looking at eras of prog and how it's progressed, I think if you actually look, it does tend to kind of evolve every 10 years or so. So,
well, you can say the same about me.
Yeah, but I think when it does evolve, that is then viewed as what is prog, and then previous stuff is like viewed as kind of, you know,
not prog.
Well,
that's not prog.
More dinosaur kind of stuff, because you know, like late 60s and 70s, you know, you had your Genesis,
Arthur Brown.
Yeah, Genesis, King Crimson, Yes. You said earlier Camel and Caravan.
I said Caravan.
And then I suppose moving into the 80s, kind of post-punk, it became neo-prog, which was your bands like Marillion, IQ.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess at that point, prog's kind of under the radar a bit.
Yeah.
Not that it's ever been fashionable.
No, but I think a lot of it tended to kind of merge slightly harder influences than more folky influences. You know.
I guess that's. I mean, the whole point of it is progressing. It's going forward and doing something slightly more adventurous and interesting than you know any other.
Yeah.
And so you know, if in the 70s it's going to be mixing, you know, rock and folk, then it makes sense that in the 80s it's going to be mixing any other given thing. Yeah,
I think it kind of reverted back to the 70s in the 90s, because you had bands like Spock's Beard, you know, kind of.
Are they that old?
Yeah. And then they were very much influenced by 70s prog rather than 80s prog. And then, you know, things I
I
suppose.
think 80s prog is a bit of a... You're either thinking about Yes or the kind of 70s bands, or you kind of end up with the modern prog sphere. But there's kind of a weird gap in the middle there.
There is, yeah. I think bands like Marillion, who were unfashionable but successful in the 80s, were a prog band, but now they've deliberately tried to shed that, and they've said it themselves.
Yeah.
We hate prog rock.
Well, that's something that every big prog name says they hate prog rock, and they completely, like King Crimson say they're not progressive rock. Stephen Wilson, he must not be named, says he's not prog rock. Or, like Robert Fripp was saying he. When accused of influencing Tool, he said, "No, Tool have influenced me,"
which is mental, really. Yeah. So I mean, there's if you read things like Prog magazine, there's bands in there which I don't think are prog. I mean,
it's not prog.
Yeah. I mean, and
but I mean, if prog's not, combining influences and trying to move towards something more interesting than whatever is current. Presumably then you're talking about bands where they're just wallowing in whatever prog currently is, or...
Well, I mean, you've got bands like Anathema, who grace the cover of Prog magazine, but if you actually listen to them, they're not prog at all. They're in a strange space where no one can label them. So
and is that not what prog's really about?
Possibly, because I mean, if you want to talk about progressing, then they started off as like a doom metal band and had harsh vocals all the way through their music, and then they went with the kind of clean vocals and a bit more Pink Floyd-esque, but in terms of odd time signatures and things like that, which generally people associate with what prog is.
Yeah, the technical aspect.
Yeah, it's not there in bands like Anathema, and it's just interesting how broad a spectrum it has, because, like, for instance, Kate Bush was always viewed as a pop, very avant-garde,
but always comes up in the prog discussion.
Yes, always on the cover of Prog magazine, and yes, her music is progressive, but it's trying to define exactly what is prog. Is it where bands go on these musical journeys where they go through multiple genres or take on different influences, or is it purely 20-minute songs with mellotrons and children's choirs?
In order to kind of skip to the end of the conversation, the answer is yes. 20-minute songs with mellotrons.
That's it. And
that's the end. That is
end of discussion. That is what prog is.
I think it's because that is completely what I love. But if you're willing to just accept that answer, yes, I want long songs with mellotrons in. That's kind of. Maybe that is why all prog, all big names in prog say that they're not prog. It's because there's such a great temptation for prog fans to just wallow in what is now, rather than thinking about what is modern progressive music moving forward. For every one person trying to do something new and interesting that everyone hates, there's going to be 10 people who are. Or 100 people who just want to hear "Call to the Crimson King" again. Yeah, which is equally fantastic. But I think it's the nostalgia is maybe the kind of the albatross around the genre's neck.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, do you think there's a line where prog can be drawn as to what constitutes prog or not? So, for instance, I've spoken to many people who seem to think Radiohead are a prog band, and I so disagree with that. And Muse as well. I hate
both of those bands. I don't know why I hate those bands. I can't get into them very easily. But I think they're. Yeah, and maybe they're not prog because we're not allowing them into the garden of our perfect music. No, but something with Radiohead, and I'm only speaking with a very casual knowledge of most well-known songs, but a lot of the time they'll take a lot of technically interesting ideas and apply them in a much more easily graspable context than, you know, a prog musician would be kind of busy masturbating over playing in 5/8 or whatever, but, you know, they can actually turn it into a song that you don't need to be technically minded to appreciate. And that is frustrating. I think we can admit that that's a, you know, kind of quite an admirable goal, to kind of take these technical ideas and do something interesting to normal people who have friends and lives. To technical side of it, that always comes in the songwriting, compositional sense, rather than wanking over 5/4 or, you know, playing incredibly technical, you know, avant-garde solos or whatever. That's a much more kind of usable breeding ground for public interest than playing 5/4 or technical shreddy solos or whatever.
Yeah. Interested in prog. Where did it start for you?
I was tricked into liking prog by my dad, as I think so many, as so many people were. I was tricked into liking prog by my dad, who realised that, you know, in order to convince young children to liking prog, you've got to, or prog and jazz, you've got to go the roundabout route. So he kind of gave me, he used to give me CDs of Iron Maiden and that kind of thing, and kind of slowly, you know, introduce, you know, progressive bands after laying the groundwork, and then you kind of, I didn't discover until, you know, the first concert I ever went to was Iron Maiden touring Matter of Life and Death.
Okay.
You know, and he took and you know, I think we saw them twice more with him.
Right.
And I didn't realise until recently he wasn't really interested in Iron Maiden at all until until he started doing this all for me.
Right.
And then later conceded that, you know, he quite liked Iron Maiden.
Okay.
But yeah, so he kind of took quite a roundabout route to kind of, you know, he kind of gave me all these Iron Maiden CDs, and because he thought, well, at least it's not hip hop or whatever.
Yeah.
Deliberately, kind of slowly, kind of pushed me toward, you know, King Crimson and Yes and Dream Theater and Porcupine Tree and that kind of thing. But I'm convinced he knew what he was doing from the start. He knew he wanted me to like Frank Zappa and Chick Corea, and everything, you know, up until that point was planning to try and push me in that direction.
Right.
The man knew what he was doing.
Now been assimilated.
Yeah, the lawsuit is pending. Why couldn't I have liked normal music that earns money?
Hip hop.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I should have. I actually think I would have had a fantastic rap career if I had the opportunity.
Me, one of my uncles, he was a big Genesis and Rush fan, and I think probably when I was about 12, he lent me a copy of Rush Permanent Waves on cassette, and also lent me a few Genesis albums on vinyl. Which might sound odd for a 12-year-old, but I had a record player. I didn't have a CD player. Everyone at school had a CD player, but I had a record player.
You know, now it's really popular and fashionable to have vinyl players and own vinyl and that kind of thing. But presumably you're talking about back when it was not popular and fashionable.
Absolutely. So yeah, everyone had CD players and I had a record player. I think there was just something about the size of the artwork.
That's what all vinyl players say.
Yeah.
Like having
so I think the Genesis albums that he lent me was Selling England by the Pound, Foxtrot and Nursery Crime, I think. And I think I probably gravitated towards prog, possibly because at the time I suppose you'd generalise as being classically trained as a musician, so I was doing grades on the piano and I was playing trumpet in orchestras and stuff, and I suspect that the complexity of prog probably found an affinity with, because it was reasonably close to the classical stuff I was playing.
That's the normal trajectory of prog, isn't it? It's kind of posh schoolboys who wanted to play electric guitar, but their mum got them a
Trumpet.
trumpet. Yeah. Which
Yeah.
is the opposite case for someone like Alan Holdsworth, who is also described as prog, but he's not prog either, really.
No.
You know, I mean, maybe UK is, but
Yeah.
people talk about prog musicians, and he comes up for some reason.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's where it started for me. So it was bona fide 70s prog, and I suppose for whatever reason, Genesis are always going to be my first band that I like. Because I mean, you know, criticise them all you want with the Phil Collins pop era.
Do you like Phil Collins?
Genesis are probably the most easily accessible prog bands, because even when they were doing the pop stuff, a lot of it was still prog, you know.
Again, I guess it's all about applying the technical mindset to composition rather than wanking in 7/8 or whatever.
Well, you'd say that, but you know, one of their biggest hits, Turn It On Again, is in 13/8, and there's multiple time signatures in that song which are really, really difficult to play, but you hear it on the radio like nearly every time.
For you.
Yeah. So, you know, I think started fairly early, and, you know, here I am.
What I'm listening to prog. It's Tesseract. You know, it's got the weird time signatures and the kind of interesting art thing, but it's too modern. It's, you know, is it gentle? Whatever. You get such a weird.
Yeah.
If you get into that conversation with.
Yes, there's a lot of keyboard warriors, you know, and I think for me, I genuinely believe it is a generational thing. You know, I think the bands like Tesseract and Periphery and whatnot are viewed
and I really love both of those bands.
Yeah, and I think that by younger people they're viewed as prog now, which is fine, but that doesn't tick that
it's fine, but that doesn't mean you're not angry.
Yeah, and you know, I tried really hard with Periphery. I still do like Tesseract, but
again, my dad, he loves prog and that kind of thing. Long suffering took me to a lot of heavy metal concerts that, like I said, I realised after the fact he wasn't that interested.
Yeah.
He described Periphery, any band with harsh vocals, as screaming and vomiting. And so then he described Periphery with all the weird time signatures and Meshuggah with all the weird time signatures as screaming and vomiting while solving a very hard Sudoku.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I think for me, no disrespect to all those bands, but I suppose their influence on, you know, this generation of young musicians, I think, has actually been quite detrimental.
Well, only insofar as there's plenty of, and I'm specifically thinking about the kind of mid-2000s metalcore thing, but you know, a lot of bands heard Meshuggah doing weird rhythms in, you know, just on one open string on the lowest note they could find, and they kind of took that and thought, so all they need to do is just play very slowly on an open string, and they didn't pick up on the, you know, the only thing that makes what Meshuggah's doing interesting is they're doing some kind of incredibly interesting rhythmic thing.
Yeah.
You know, they took all of the wrong lessons from some of these bands, and I think
watered it down.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and it's such a, especially, you know, again, I'm particularly thinking of so many boring shows I went to around Leicester. You know, where you've got the bands where they do the thing where they play the riff, they play the lowest note they can in some weird rhythm, then they go to halftime on the China to play the same rhythm,
the break,
and it's always, you know, it's always something like da 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 da.
Yeah.
You know, and then they'll kind of do something really, really adventurous where they'll kind of do da 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 da. My God, it's an eighth note.
Yeah.
You know, it's.
For me, it is an age thing. I think, you know, I grew up with the 70s and 80s prog stuff, and to me that is prog. You know, the 8-string drop B guitar riffs on zeros and ones just doesn't do it for me, unfortunately.
Again, I think the key for a lot of those things is the successful bands that do that know that, you know, lowest note zeros and ones isn't gonna, you know, it's not interesting, and so they'll add a layer on top of that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the case with bands like Meshuggah, who, if you listen to interviews with them, you know, they are influenced by your Alan Holdsworth and your Marillions as well. Yeah. It is interesting to see Pioneers' influences, and then the bands who copycat the Pioneers, the influences narrows to a smaller pool. And then eventually it just loses what the original inspiration was, if you know what I mean.
What I find the most interesting out of anything is when you see, you know, a musician, you know, like you know, the guys in Meshuggah or whatever talking about liking Marillion, and you're sitting there thinking, Marillion, Meshuggah, how the hell did those two kind of, you know, there's no obvious crossover at all between those bands, but then you kind of just take any given thing you like and then apply it, you know, to what anyone else would see as an incredibly distant kind of.
Yeah, and I think maybe some of that is, I don't want to say prejudice, but I think there's a certain amount of embarrassment towards the originators of prog. So, you know, how many people our age who, you know, say that they like prog would be able to, you know, not feel overly embarrassed by Rick Wakeman in a cape,
I think
playing 8 banks of keyboards.
I think there maybe are aspects of prog better forgotten, but the 8 banks of keyboard is not one of them. The cape is, but the visual spectacle of seeing, you know, like when I saw Goblin and Claudio Simonetti had 8 units stacked on top of each other. Well, no, I think he had 6 units stacked on top of each other in one stack, and he had other devices around it. One stack with 6 devices on it. I think, you know, it's kind of like the kind of gratuitous, you know, 9 toms and 18 cymbals, drums, or you know, the kind of oversized guitar amps and that kind of thing, cabs,
guitars.
Another aspect of prog that could be forgotten, I think. I've never seen it done.
Tales from Topographic Ocean.
Yeah. I think there's a danger in speaking for young people and saying they're embarrassed about, you know, this music that we love, because then we can, you know, then you can say, oh, well, they just don't understand. They just don't understand.
They don't.
But you know, I think when you're kind of trying to, you know, find common ground between, with air quotes, old prog and new, you know, I think when you kind of see that incredibly distant link between, like I said, you know, Marillion and Meshuggah, or another example, you know, any, you know, like Hawkwind and you know, Stephen Wilson's kind of latest stuff or whatever, you know, it's such a small influence among so many other influences in any given thing.
Yeah, and I don't know whether the kind of 70s prog as an influence, you know, has got anything to do with people who are classically trained. You know.
I always think it helps. With any musician, it's one of those things where you kind of, I think as soon. I find it very easy to listen to something and think they've got a really interesting musical ear for this kind of thing, rather than it kind of feels like, well, I know where this is going.
Yeah.
You know, I feel the same way particularly about films. If I know exactly where the next hour is going before I've seen it, then I don't feel like there's any point in it. I'd rather kind of, you know, be surprised and, you know, interested to, you know, see something where, you know, they take one idea and then do something that I wouldn't have thought of with it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't need to be some kind of massive twist. Just, you know, if you're hearing a melody and then suddenly moves in a direction you weren't thinking, you think, I wouldn't have done that. That's what I find really interesting.
Yeah.
In all things, I think.
In all that in context, then, give us some examples of, your favourite prog albums?
I think that's kind of a difficult question, like you said, because there's so many there's so many incorrect answers depending on what the question actually is.
Yeah. As long as you don't say Muse or Radiohead.
I think it's such a cliche answer to say Dream Theater Metropolis Part 2.
Okay.
But I think if you're talking about the technical aspects of progressive music, it's every single song bar 2 on that album is kind of just every single kind of bit of those songs is just absolutely fantastic in a technical sense, and maybe that's the kind of thing that immediately makes another person think, oh well, he's just wanking, there's no emotion, there's no feel or whatever. But
right.
But when you I'm particularly thinking about Dance of Eternity, the gratuitous instrumental section.
Yeah.
That is what I find really interesting. The kind of thing where it's just a ridiculous virtuosic display of look at how far we can push these technical ideas, because that, as a player, that's what really appeals to me about a lot of prog bands. Seeing other bands doing any given thing and saying, I can do it one louder, or in this case, one more beat, or whatever. And that was the whole point of King Crimson as well, is them they're looking at every other band thinking, we can do something harder than that.
With one more beat.
With one more beat.
What makes Metropolis Part 2 prog rock rather than prog metal?
You didn't say prog rock, you said what's your favourite prog album? There you go. Or maybe I've misremembered, but the tape will tell us.
It's a technicality.
but you know what I mean? It's such a weird thing to get caught up on there.
Yes.
Because in terms of thinking about other prog albums, looking for something more atmospheric and less technical, I guess I would say something like Warrior on the Edge of Time by Hawkwind or something.
Okay.
I think the Quark, Strangers and Charm is the album that is probably my favourite Hawkwind album, and only from this childish nostalgia. But just having that kind of continuous sense where you're kind of building an atmosphere through the whole thing. It's very, you kind of listen to it and they absolutely capture that kind of space vibe as opposed to just being ambiguous prog music or whatever.
Yeah.
And even then, they don't necessarily do anything that we would describe as progressive. It's not technically. It's not especially technical. It's not especially. It's not really taking anything compositionally. Above and beyond. They just every kind of every given Hawkwind song vaguely ties towards the space angle. If not directly, then I guess in that druggy, stargazy way. They're two quite kind of disparate ends of certainly my interest in prog. But what would you say then? If just ambiguously the best prog album rather than prog rock or metal or whatever.
Yeah.
Because I guess you can only ever speak for yourself rather than saying, oh, this is the best prog album. Because I've already said Metropolis Part 2.
Yeah, I think for me, most of my prog listening is in the typical sphere of what would be known as prog rock. So, Marillion, Rush, Genesis, King Crimson.
The big four of prog.
Well, I'm leaving out Yes, somewhat, but I think my prog listening has always been more mainstream prog rather than the avant-garde stuff on the fringes as such. So I mean, for me, an album like Misplaced Childhood by Marillion, that would be something that I would define as prog rock. Even though I don't actually think it's necessarily Marillion's best album, I think their best album is Clutching at Straws. But in terms of something that you could generalise as encapsulating everything about prog rock, it's a concept album. The artwork is very fantasy. Lots of colours and abstract images. There's a
maybe more with prog than any other genre, maybe except death metal. But there's kind of imagery associated with prog. Whereas I guess with anything else, I suppose with rock music, you get an idea of what the musicians are going to look like. You've got a long hair guy, filleting a guitar or whatever. But with prog rock, you're immediately thinking about Roger Dean artwork.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think Misplaced Childhood is
absolutely.
Ticks all those boxes. There's a clear narrative that goes through the whole album.
The songs all flow into each other.
Yeah, they do, and I think that's something that appeals to me as well, where it's one cohesive piece of music, which, if on a particular day you want to listen to the tracks individually, you can. It has the singles.
You'd be arrested. You'd be sent to the gulag, but you can't do that.
So,
you could put it on shuffle.
You could.
Just hand yourself into a police station.
But if you want to listen to hit singles, you can. There's Kaylee, there's Lavender on there. If you want to listen to the long kind of soundscapey parts, there's other tracks on the album that tick that box. There's instrumental sections, there's light and shade all the way through. There's there's keyboard all the way through, some keyboard solo, some really atmospheric, clean guitar parts, and really kind of effects laden, atmospheric guitar solo. It ticks all the boxes that you want from prog art. There's odd time signatures, everything.
Maybe this is kind of what we're talking about when we were talking about Muse and Radiohead not being progressive. Odd time signatures, I guess, aren't the be-all and end-all of prog.
No, not necessarily, but I think Misplaced Childhood is an album which has got the right balance of melodic songs and songs which do show off the prog side. You've got Lords of the Backstage or Waterhole, tracks like that, which, if you want your kind of instrumental meandering prog sections, then it ticks the box. It's a pretty short album, actually. I think it's only about
40 minutes.
40 minutes. So in terms, there's
it's not quite Raining Blood. But
no, and it's neither is it Rush or Genesis in terms of having 25-minute long songs. But I think that, for me, if someone said, give me a prog album, it's accessible, but it's also really deep at the same time. So I think, for me, that's probably a decent catch-all prog album. But then, if you
because fairly well-written prog rather just as a showpiece for technicality. I would probably be thinking about Rush or something like that. Where I was trying to come up with a solid answer and realised I have no idea what the best Rush album is, because they're all perfect. Because I probably would. I'm trying to resist the temptation to say Permanent Waves on tape, but I think I might.
Yeah, Rush is very difficult to pinpoint exactly which is the best album, because
not that they change every.
No, but they kind of mid to late 70s to early 80s, there was a period of amazing Rush albums. You've got 2112, you've got Farewell to Kings, Permanent Waves, Moving Pictures, Signals.
Well, I was going to say it was a lucky save that my mind tripped over when I said, I embarrassed that you considered Permanent Waves, because the one I was thinking of was Power Windows. I do like.
I do like Power Windows, actually. Yeah, that is one of.
But that kind of encapsulates the '80s Rush.
It does. Yeah.
Although I think it does a better job than
Hold Your Fire.
Hold Your Fire. Yeah.
And Grace Under Pressure.
Grace Under Pressure I love.
I don't like.
I like Grace Under Pressure. Hold Your Fire, I think, is. I don't know, it feels to me sometimes, and I say it's out of love, but it feels like an entire album of mystic rhythms from Power Windows.
I love that. I do love mystic rhythms, actually, but
I think that's one of the few songs they've backed away from, isn't it? And said, actually, that was a bit naive.
No, never. never. But yeah, I think.
No, is it Mystic Rhythms or is it another one? Maybe it's Tai Shan or something like that.
Oh.
One of them I know the band has stepped away from.
Yeah. The album I forgot to mention was Hemispheres, actually. I think that probably, for me, is the album I'd go to the most. I mean, and I've seen Rush a few times now, and I love Moving Pictures as an album, but it's not my favourite Rush album.
I'm not about Moving Pictures. 2112. I mean, if you're talking about the kind of big, long, progressive concept piece.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not that bothered by it.
No, I could take or leave that one, actually.
But at the same time, I'm not that bothered by Cygnus, but I feel like if Hemispheres was, if they just copied and pasted the last 3 tracks from Hemispheres 4 times, it would probably be my favourite album. I wouldn't even notice that it was the same music. But I absolutely, so there's something about both parts of Cygnus that just I glaze over with it, which is weird because I absolutely love, the kind of cliche long prog song, usually Gates of Delirium or whatever.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, on Hemispheres you've got obviously the opener, Cygnus X1 Book 2.
Yeah, it's the second part, isn't it?
Yeah, which I think is better than the first one, although extremely lyrically complicated and
well, it's all
mind and the heart,
Apollonia Ideals or whatever.
Yeah, but then the other 3 tracks on that, Circumstances is a great one. The Trees.
Well, Circumstances I think is probably one of my favourite Rush songs.
Yeah, and then
that Xanadu and something from Presta.
Yeah, and then you've got La Villa Strangiato to finish it off, which is awesome. So yeah, I think that would probably be my favourite Rush album. Yeah, so what about King Crimson then?
Well,
because there's been very distinct eras of King Crimson which have all been different.
Yeah. I think I would certainly. I love the kind of earlier King Crimson stuff, but I think to me it's the kind of the 80s sound that I absolutely love, and I would probably, if I had to kind of pick a single piece of music to listen to for the rest of my life, it would just be the live recording of Construction of Light Parts 1 and 2 with Adrian Belew in Chicago, Park West 2008, which I had a bootleg of the whole live concert, and I lost it, and I can't find it anywhere. And
is that when the police confiscated it?
That's when the police confiscated my computers, but nothing was proven. And
it was for reason.
But I think especially towards the later kind of King Crimson albums, I think pretty much everything after Discipline, I think the studio versions feel incredibly dry compared to hearing them live. Particularly Three of a Perfect Pair and Construction of Light, I think sound a bit crap.
On the studio version. Okay.
Yeah. I love the song, but I think I probably heard them first live and then live recording and then heard the studio, and it just lacks the energy on the studio to me.
I know what you mean. I think for me the studio versions are actually better because they're more precise and less loose. So, for instance, on a few of the King Crimson DVDs I've got, a few of the songs, particularly in the Discipline era, they actually make mistakes. Which is human, but in my mind, when I bought all the studio albums, they were these perfect musicians.
How dare they be people?
How dare they? And I think seeing them make the mistakes live kind of took some of the shine away. But in terms of my favourite King Crimson albums, I'd have to say Discipline and Beat.
Yeah.
Just for the musical complexity, and they're the albums that I suppose got me interested in Chapman Stick. Yeah. So I went and bought one.
I'm trying to rack my brains and think who else is known for Chapman Stick.
Nick Beggs.
Well, besides Nick Beggs, who was Tony Levin's illegitimate son, who else besides Tony Levin and his illegitimate son played Chapman Stick?
The bass player from Cynic, Sean Malone, plays a Chapman stick.
Yeah.
I know John Myung's used one a few times.
Yeah.
I know he used one on New Millennium on Falling Into Infinity. Who else plays Chapman stick?
Because it always seems like whenever someone plays a Chapman stick, everyone wants to say, "Look, they are. It is a real instrument.
Yeah.
It's not a niche."
You don't see it that often, but
I'll tell you what I did see, and I've only ever seen the band Lunar Kiss play a Kelstone, which is like it's like a guitar board laid down like a keyboard, and then they play the guitar because it's kind of got strings and a pickup, but it's laid down kind of horizontally, and you still want to kind of fret it like a guitar and pluck it like a guitar, but it's all laid out.
I see.
Kind of a bit like a lap steel or something.
Kind of.
Yeah. That's another weird instrument that I've never seen.
Yeah.
I don't see
it. I do like the sound of Chapman stick.
Yeah.
Very much so. It's just really difficult. Really difficult.
Unless you're related to Tony Levin.
Or Nick Beggs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, Discipline was the album that probably encapsulates everything I like about King Crimson, because you've got tracks like Sheltering Sky.
Yeah. Well, for me, I would say Discipline. The title track is what I really love. Yeah.
Yeah, the use of counterpoint and everything,
Well, it's more like abusive counterpoint.
Well, yes.
I think did Bill Bruford at some point say that, specifically talking about Discipline, that's the only band where you can play in 17/16 time and sleep in a hotel.
But I think in terms of other bands, I think Genesis, Selling England by the Pound.
Yeah.
That was probably the album that started it off for me. The opening track, Dancing with the Moonlit Night. That blew my mind when I first heard it, because it starts off with this kind of a cappella Peter Gabriel verse, and then ends up being this kind of chaotic, heavy segue, I suppose, into the rest of the album. Everyone seems to credit Eddie Van Halen for inventing tapping, which is completely unfounded and untrue.
It's fantastic PR.
Yeah, absolutely. But on Selling England by the Pound, Steve Hackett is tapping on some of the songs, and that was, can't remember the years, 1973 or something like that. It's ridiculous, really, because it was a good 5 or 6 years before Van Halen.
And I'm very hard pressed to believe that Steve Hackett's the first person to.
No, yeah, I'm sure it's probably some kind of gypsy guitarist with 3 fingers or something that came up with it. But
you heard it here first. Django Reinhardt invented tapping.
Yeah.
Have you seen Amazing Rare Footage? They've got a YouTube channel called Amazing Rare Footage, where they just take videos of any given player, and then they kind of like they do like an overdub of it, saying, "Oh, it's Meshuggah playing Aladdin," or like or it'll be B.B. King playing shred metal licks.
Okay.
But it's so well done that you honestly would believe it. It's fantastic.
Kirk Hammett plays in tune.
Yeah.
Not using a wah-wah pedal. But there's some great songs on Signing on by the Pound, First and Fifth, Battle of Epping Forest, Cinema Show.
Yeah, you could just go on and list every song on the album.
You could, but yeah, I think that's an album that defines prog. Mellotron, I think, is the instrument that does it for me. I think if someone asks what does prog sound like, I'll just play them a clip of Mellotron.
Just play Mellotron a drum fill and a drum fill in an odd time signature, and then just 20 minutes of guitar solo.
That's prog.
No, keyboard solo. Yeah.
With a cape.
With a cape.
With a cape.
With a cape.
Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
If these albums are perfect, why continue to write music in that style? Which, interestingly enough, none of the bands actually did.
Well, yeah,
they all evolved.
Well,
and played
I think
different.
The most crucial thing is what we were saying earlier. Is that these bands all kind of just they looked at what was going on at the time to try to do something different rather than saying, okay, well, we're going to write songs like this. They were trying to do something different rather than draw a kind of outline and follow that plan instead.
Yeah, and I think that's what has always appealed to me about King Crimson or Robert Fripp, where he exhausted an idea and then just completely abandoned it.
He described King Crimson as a working ethos rather than a band.
Yeah. And so that's why with King Crimson you've got very distinct eras, because he raised the bar and then realised that
threw the bar out of the window.
Yeah, and then literally just dissolved it, which has probably helped them in the long run, and avoided them burning out, which is what bands like Yes did, who ended up disappearing up their own backside, by doing things like Tales from Topographic Oceans, and then ended up.
I think a lot of the prog sound is kind of, is built so heavily in retrospect. It's kind of saying, okay, well, we like Mellotrons and Weird Time Signatures, because we listen to Yes and Genesis or whatever, and then taking this idea of what prog music sounds like, from any kind of cherry-picked selection of bands, because any other person will say, well, yeah, I like prog because it's, down-tuned guitars and flashy riffs like Periphery and whatever this weirdo was who described Hacktivist as prog. But it's why it's such an amorphous genre. It's got so many branches coming off it that you can only really cherry pick and say, I like this kind of this is what prog is. It's these bands that I like from.
Yeah.
But it's so disparate. I think in a much happier alternate universe, I think there's probably they'll probably just break it up, scupper it completely, and just all kind of come under their own genre labels or something.
Yeah.
But then then people would decide to flout those genre labels, and that would be called prog. So there you go.
No, it is interesting because the genre is so sprawling, and I think depending on where people pick up, like in a particular band defines what they define prog as. People who only listen to Genesis in the 80s wouldn't view them as a prog band, they'd view them as a pop band because they sold millions and millions and millions of albums.
Yeah.
It's like Christian Bale in American Psycho, which we watched last night actually.
I've been a big Genesis fan ever since the release of their 1980 album, Duke.
Prior before the album Duke.
I really didn't understand any of their work. It was too artsy.
Too arty.
Duke. But for someone like me who picked them up listening to Selling England by the Pound, they're a prog band and always will be, but they happen to progress into writing pop music, which,
you might say they progressed into financial security.
Yes, that's right. Pension fund for Phil and Co. Yeah, I think it is an ever-evolving genre.
Yeah.
Which I don't know whether that's a good or bad thing.
Well,
it says what it does on the tin.
Well, absolutely. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think the only people who might see that as a bad thing are people who want all prog to be mellotrons and capes and weird time signatures.
Yeah.
As long as you're willing to kind of, let go of that and kind of look around. Absolutely. No, we need our capes and weird.
Yeah, we do.
As long as you're willing to kind of, just look around and see what other people are doing at the minute, thinking, okay, but what can I do that's different and interesting? Then it's always going to be a good thing.
Right, a double concept album about spaceships. And
This is exactly the problem. You've got one side of prog musician who looks around and sees, okay, well they're all doing this, so I want to try and do something different. Then you've got another type of prog musician who looks around and sees, so they're doing 20-minute solos with 3 keyboards and a cape. I need to do 40-minute solos with 2 capes.
One louder.
And one louder, absolutely.
Yeah. But it's been nice to see bands like Opeth actually fully embrace
Opeth
prog.
Stephen Wilson do quite a good job of synthesizing all of these influences and coming up with something new and interesting out of that, which is still quite
modern sounding,
but it still quite obviously pulls from its heritage. Rather than just being a gratuitous kind of rip-off of old prog.
And I think that's where bands like Porcupine Tree excelled, because I think when I first heard Porcupine Tree, I bought In Absentia, and I bought it from I think it was a music shop called MVC. It was a big chain. It's shut down now, and they actually had a prog section. And next to the
that's a bygone era.
Yeah,
retail, like physical stores with a prog section.
Yeah, and there was a little label next to it which said for fans of Dream Theater and Symphony X, which actually, if you listen to all those bands,
no, absolutely not.
The answer is no. So I bought it without hearing any of the music, because this was before the internet was popular and you could.
This is when your vinyl player ran on coal. You're not upgraded to a steam-powered CD player.
So I bought this album expecting 13/8 and everything like that, and listened to it, and it wasn't anything like that, and I was
rubbish.
Yeah, I was so disappointed, because it wasn't what was sold to me. But in actual fact, it is completely prog, because it's just prog in a different, more modern.
Yeah. In Absentia is kind of labelled as the kind of the herald of modern prog, isn't it?
Yeah, and I just. At the time, I didn't understand that, because it wasn't images and words or, hemispheres or.
See, I came in on Signify, so
right.
I kind of that feels a lot more conspicuously kind of. I don't want to say old-fashioned, but it draws on that a lot more than Absentia does.
Yeah. Sleep with no dreaming. Yeah. That kind of thing. Born, live, die.
Waiting. Born, live, die. Signify.
So, what is prog?
What is prog?
Who knows?